Hello, everyone. Welcome to Career Bootcamp 2022. Can't believe we're saying 2022, but I'm sure we'll get used to it. Thank you, DJ Marcella, for the wonderful music introduction. My personal favorite is Sean Paul. It always gets me going. So I'm Justine Reynolds. I'll be moderating today's session. My current position is Departmental Liaison at Infrastructure Canada. And I'm also thankful to hold the position of NCR-YPN co-chair, a subset of the Federal Youth Network, the FIN. I took it as a compliment to be moderating today's session when I was invited by FIN, as I'm choosing to take it as a compliment that they feel I have an okay reputation. Jokes aside, I'm personally really looking forward to hearing from our awesome panelists today and learning how I can personally improve my reputation. I'm particularly interested in learning how to improve my reputation through social media, given that so much work we do these days involves social media and it's becoming more and more common across the government in general. So as you know, today's session is about influencing your reputation. This session is in English, as you can tell. If you've joined the wrong session and you're actually looking for the French session, please feel free to join the French session. It's going on simultaneously. You can just check out the chat. One of our moderators will be posting the link in the chat there. So please feel free if you've joined the wrong session. I would like to acknowledge that the land in which many of us are viewing this session today is the unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people. Some of you today are joining from a variety of locations across Canada, and I encourage you to take a moment to acknowledge the land in which you're joining us today. Although we would love to be together in person, as has been done in previous years, we're super thankful and appreciative that so many of you are able to join from across Canada. As we move through today's session, please share your comments in the chat space, as well as your questions in the Q&A. You'll be able to see them at the bottom of your screen. If you have any questions throughout or encounter any issues, please comment in the chat. For the Q&A portion, please enter your questions in there, and you'll notice when others enter their questions that you can like the question that they've posed with the thumbs up function, and that'll ensure that the most popular questions goes to the top and that we'll be able to address those primarily. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can, but of course we're a little bit limited in our time, so we'll ensure to touch on those that all of you seem to enjoy the most. So let's take a look now at the learning objectives. You can see them up on the screen. So after this session, we really hope that you will all be able to recognize the impact that colleagues' perceptions can have on our ability to work effectively and advance their careers, reflect on how others may perceive us, and identify ways to control the narrative of our reputations using simple techniques. So today we have three special guests with us today. They are all quite famous in the GC. We like to call them GC famous, and hopefully if you don't know them, you'll get to know them a little bit better after today. And please follow them on social media. They're quite active on Twitter, LinkedIn, and you can also find them on Instagram. So I know I'm not alone in being super excited to hear from Amanda, Maame, and Sean, and hopefully we'll get to know them better today. Please see the chat, as I mentioned, for their handles. And make sure to follow them and check them out on LinkedIn and other social media platforms. So welcome to all of you, all of our panelists today. Before we turn it over to our panelists, I know we're all eager to hear from them. We're going to start with a couple poll questions just to get the flow of things going and to hear from you as our members. So Marcella will pull up the polls on the screen. You'll be able to submit your responses right on the screen, and then we will take a look at what the answers mean to us. You'll have about 30 seconds to submit your answers once they pop up. There we go. So first question, have you thought about your reputation in the GC before this session? Be honest.
Ten more seconds. And I'll close the poll.
Okay, pretty close call, but we have 67% which said yes and 33% which said no. So pretty good. And that's a good indication that some of us probably do need to hear this session today. All right, so we'll move on to the next question. What motivated you to attend this session? Looking to improve my reputation, looking to learn what constitutes a good reputation in the GC, want to understand the building blocks of a good reputation. I'm just excited to hear from this wonderful panel.
Five more seconds.
All right, so only 6% indicated they're looking to improve their reputation. 44% looking to learn what constitutes a good reputation. 38% want to understand the building blocks of a good reputation. So similar to the previous one. And 11%, I'm just excited to hear from this panel. Thanks everyone for your answers. So now we're going to, without further ado, hear from our panelists. We're going to start with Amanda Bernardo. I'd like to just give you a little bit of an introduction of Amanda before we turn it over to her. So Amanda is the acting director of the Change Management and Service Design team within Shared Services Canada, where she is tasked with supporting the advancement of SSC's transformation efforts. Amanda Bernardo is a cross-functional public servant known for her professionalism, grit, and ability to deliver results. Her career to date with the Government of Canada has largely focused on public policy, project management, change management, transformation, and engagement. Amanda, we'd like to turn it over to you to tell us a little bit about your experiences within the government and how to improve our reputation.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks for having me. This is my first engagement of 2022. So I'm super excited, and what better way to kick off with Finn. So thank you everyone for being here and taking the time. And I'm really looking forward to also hearing from my esteemed panelists that are joining me today. So it's an interesting topic, building a positive reputation in the Government of Canada. What does that mean? And maybe I'll start it with an output. So for me, you made it, or you have a really good reputation when you really start to just get referrals in terms of people seeking your specific knowledge, expertise. If someone's looking for potentially a job opportunity that aligns with your skill set, if they're looking for a speaking engagement, if they're looking for some collaboration in a certain space, when you become that top of mind, oh, I'm gonna, get Maame, I'm gonna get Sean Boots to do that, or Amanda Bernardo, you notice that you're starting to build a reputation for yourself in that domain, or whatever domain you kind of set out for yourself. And so I'll kind of look at the reputation piece from a few different angles, and I'll keep it pretty high level just to save time, and that way we can really dive into questions. But for me, there's a few elements. So one, like the elephant in the room, or the most obvious one rather, is social media, especially that we're working in this remote setting. Social media has become this new way of connecting with colleagues, with connecting with even senior leadership, with different community groups or communities of practice. It's a really great way to build your network across, barriers, across, the country, however you want to, dice it. And that was really way before the pandemic as well. You started to see the opportunity for conversations to emerge through, events like Leaders GC or Finn. And so you're starting to have this a bigger and open space to collaborate with people that maybe you didn't always have within your department. So building that online presence for yourself is really, really important. I know for me, just a pet peeve I have is like a lot of people do use social media, and they use Twitter, for example, and it's one of the go-tos I always refer people to. But if your Twitter bio is absolutely blank, how can someone know who you are and what you bring to the table and where your expertise lies? So I saw someone repeat that during, career boot camp. So if you are on Twitter and you are starting to follow and engage with people, even just a simple one for now that says, public servant or, passionate about dogs, located in Ottawa, like your location, those simple details really help with that first elevator pitch impression of who you are. The other piece is authenticity. You can really tell very easily when someone is being authentic or inauthentic. And so you don't want to approach building your reputation in kind of this isolated brick by bit piece. It really has to be true of who you are, your interests, your passions, and having that show through, whether it be through, communications you're putting out there, content you're putting out there, conversations you're being part of, engagements you're being part of, whatever the case may be. I know for many, tying this back to social media, there's sometimes like, how much of myself do I share? That's really up to you. My approach personally has been, I value the whole self. So you're going to find on my Twitter, work that I'm doing through SSC, pictures of my dog who's currently sitting on my lap. If I nailed a really good recipe, you better believe I'm proud of it. I'm probably going to take a picture of it too. So as long as it's really being true to who you are, I think that's the most important piece when it comes to authenticity. Other people do like to separate it, Twitter maybe just for work. They have a secret private one for their personal lives. That's okay too. It's as much as you want to share, as long as what you're sharing is true to who you are, because those cracks will start to come through if it's not true to who you are. The other pieces is adding value. So if you're, looking to collaborate with folks and you are working, for example, in a certain domain. So I work in change management. I try to share things that I'm doing. I'm currently taking some courses. I'd like to put that out there. So I'm building value in my network of why people might want to work with me or know me. If people then are working in another department in a similar way, I can add value by sharing what I work on, what I've learned, and similarly, they can add that value back into my network as well. This ties really nicely with the next piece, which is giving more than you take. I think, sometimes when we network and when we're building these reputations, we often meet people and we take from them what we need. We want to have a conversation in return. So for me, my policy is very open door. So many people helped me throughout my career that I now in turn open my door to do the same for others. So giving more than you take is really, really important. I'm rushing through these just to salvage time, but I know this graphic will also be available, and I hope it will help folks reflect on some of these tools that I like to reflect on. The other piece is keeping your promises. The GC is big, don't get me wrong. There's 200, I don't know what the data is, 250,000 of us, but it's also really small. And so keeping your promises is really important. If you say you're going to do something, if you say you're going to be present, if you accept a job, you say you're going to be there for a year, try to stick to your promises. Obviously, life happens, things change, but it's really important to be able to have your word mean something. And your word, regardless of career reputation or life reputation, I think that's something that follows you around. And that's why at the top of this graphic, there's a quote that says, it can take a long time to build a reputation and only 5 minutes to ruin it. If you think about that, you may do things differently. And I think your word, your authenticity, keeping your promises, that all really plays into that. The other piece is values and ethics. So we have our values and ethics that we are governed by through the Government of Canada, our Code of Ethics. And those are really important to be mindful of. I know one of them that always sticks out to me is stewardship. Just remembering why we're here and doing what we do. We have a role to be able to give the best advice. And so if you are in a situation, I hope you never back down from that you're able to give true and honest advice that will inform the decision-making we need in the Government of Canada. But it also holds everybody accountable. And that's another key piece that I believe is really important in creating and maintaining positive reputations in the public service. And lastly, relationships matter. I can't tell you enough of how important building your network really is in your GC career. And I'll speak to that a little bit briefly on my own experience, but building those relationships with folks and then considering all of the, adding the value, keeping your promises to those people, people will be the reason why your reputation will be remembered, or where it will be forgotten, or whether it will be good or whether it will be bad. If you're a bad human being, people are going to find out you're a bad human being. If you're a great human being and you're collaborative, you're supportive, you're kind, people remember that, and that can go a really long way in advancing your career. For me, so my little bio, it said like known for professionalism, grit, blah, blah, blah. I would say the last probably 3 years of my career has been based on my reputation. So I had been jumping, if you look at my CV, I was a little bit of a jumper, because I was tapped on the shoulder. Hey, I know you do really good in these types of high profile, high fire issues management cases. Do you want to come and do this? Hey, do you want to do this? Hey, do you want to do this? So I really jumped around the last 3.5, 4 years on these high priority files because I became known for it. Likewise, I always get emails. Hey, Amanda, do you know someone who works in this space that's really good in this subject matter? Are they a right fit? Don't forget, when you're doing your interviews, yes, it's hitting those asset qualifications and the experiences and the education, blah, blah, blah. But the last component that really makes or breaks whether you get a job offer is right fit. And that's where your references come into play. And you'll notice now that these references aren't always who you report to. It's who are your colleagues, who are your subordinates, who are people that you just genuinely worked with. They want to get that 360 review of who you are as a person, because that reputation will come through. So I hope I kind of rushed through this because I know there's a lot more great content coming your way from our other panelists, but I hope this gives you a bit of an idea of some of the nuts and bolts of building a positive reputation and really understanding that output, which ultimately can be career progression. And in the government, that can be lateral movements, it can be promotions, but it really can, at the end of the day, mean creating a really positive network that will sustain you as you grow in the public service. And to me, that's the best output that a positive reputation can build for you. So thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Amanda. There's a quote that I often see. It's how people make you feel is what you'll be remembered by. I don't know if I'm wording it properly, but what you said really made me feel that. And just hearing from you, you're so positive and insightful that we can tell that your reputation really has a lasting impact on people. And clearly it goes to show in all the work you've done. So a lot of those tips were really helpful, some simple, but so helpful to know, like just putting a summary on your Twitter handle goes a long way. So thank you. Let's hear from Sean next. Let's hear from Sean next. But before we do, I'm just going to give a quick background of the infamous Sean. Sean Boots is a policy advisor with the Canadian Digital Service, CDS. He previously worked as a product designer with Photo Mobile, a Ghana-based social enterprise focused on empowering underheard communities, and as a developer at GAC, working on the travel.gc.ca website redesign. He rejoined the federal government in fall 2016 to help launch CDS as a new digital service delivery initiative. Sean studied public and international affairs at the University of Ottawa and enjoys working at the intersection of technology and public policy. Over to you, Sean.
Cool. Thanks so much, Justine. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, I guess first off, it's like in some ways it feels kind of unexpected to be here and to be on a panel like this one. Kind of, if I think back to, before I joined the public service, basically like most of my life, like all through like university and grad school, I was just like an incredibly shy, introverted, quiet kid, like no strong opinions, didn't want to sort of speak up in class or anything. And it's funny now that I've like somehow in the past few years kind of accidentally became this like person that people are like, this like well-known person in like the government tech space. And I'm like, how did like, this is so weird. How did that happen? And it's interesting looking back, because I think a big part of it, just to sort of like kind of how I ended up here, I think since joining the Canadian Digital Service, it's a part of the Federal Treasury Board. A lot of our work is around like delivering better services and like trying to like bring in like more modern ways of working into the public service. And I think like right from the start, I was really encouraged to go out and like talk to other people across the public service. It's like in our field, like talking with like friends at SSC or like at other departments or in like the office of the CIO, and just like this is something that all of you might have kind of learned by this point, but it's just really shocking and really cool how open people across the public service are to like going for like, I mean, nowadays, like a virtual coffee chat or like taking the time to talk about their work. And especially early on when I, just come back to the public service, I was just like, man, like there are so many cool people and there's so much cool stuff to learn from other folks in government. And I think that was sort of the starting point, going out and talking to people and learning from them, and then keeping in touch with people, like mostly on Twitter, and then just over time kind of ending up with this community of really interesting public servants. And after a few years, like, if I had never kind of, left my little cubicle or gotten out of the office back when we had offices, I never would have met all these interesting people. And after a few years of that, it became this thing where, I'd be at like a tech meetup or an open government conference, and people were like, hey, you're Sean Boots, like I know you from Twitter. And it's like both like very embarrassing and also just kind of fun that it's like, oh, there's just like this whole family of like cool public servants, even if we've never actually met in real life. And I guess as far as like thinking about like what are the sort of things that kind of contribute to that, to like building, kind of like Amanda was saying, like building relationships and building connections with other public servants, I think for me, like, a big part of it was that I fell into a topic of work that I really love, like public sector tech or like digital government or whatever you want to call it. And then just kind of tried to learn as much as I could from other people. And I think it's like kind of like Amanda was saying about authenticity. It's like if you try too hard to like I'm going to like mechanically build my reputation, or like if you try too hard to like impress people, people can tell that you're trying too hard. It's like it's not authentic. It kind of backfires. And I think like, I don't know, like you can think of like examples of this. Like I remember in grad school, there was like public sector networking events where you'd like all be like, there's like, public service executives around a table and you're like a student going around and like trying to like pitch yourself, and it was just like a completely mortifying experience. I know, I'm sure you've all been there. But my approach today is basically like there's so much that I can learn from other people, and if you kind of go in with that being kind of like the goal, to be like, I'm here to learn, I'm here to like meet interesting people and like hear about their work, and sort of like, making connections or building reputation is sort of like a very, very secondary goal. I think like having like listening and learning being your main priority, I think for me at least has worked really well. And basically like, spend more time trying to learn from others than trying to be like, look at my cool opinions, look how great I am, which is like not ideal. And I think the other thing that comes to mind a lot is just like giving other people credit for their work and for their ideas. Like I'm sure some of you have probably experienced this at different times, like already in your public service careers. It's like, I think my like least favorite thing of all time is people taking credit for others' work. And it's like, on the one hand, it's like, it's the worst. And then on the other hand, it's sort of like people who are doing that, I think, are often lacking in like the self-esteem to be like, to be able to celebrate other people and to be able to like, take team wins as like, a win. That's a thing. I think like, for me nowadays, it's like I spend a lot of time like writing about digital government stuff, and I just think it's like it's so nice and such a cool experience to be able to use that as a way to celebrate other people's ideas. Like I'm writing about this stuff all the time, and I'll be the first to say like I have zero original ideas. It's all just like, hey, this is the cool thing that someone else came up with. Like here's a neat chance to like share that on and amplify it, and to like celebrate that and sort of like help bring that over to new audiences. Sort of like there'll be people in the United States or in like France or somewhere else who are writing cool stuff about the field I work in, and to be able to sort of take that and package it and say like, hey, like other folks, like check this out, is a really nice, like it just feels really cool to be able to do that and to pass that along. So I guess maybe to wrap up there, it's almost like less about building reputation, more just like being like a kind and thoughtful public servant, but basically like listening, as much as you can, like learning as much as you can from other people and like taking the time to talk to them, and then celebrating and amplifying the ideas that other people have, was a really, I think sort of part of how I ended up being where I am today. So, yeah.
Thanks so much for sharing, Sean. I think it's really cool how kind of at the basis of what you're talking about is being kind and listening, right? And the same goes for Amanda, like being authentic. So just posting your thoughts and kind of overloading people's news feeds isn't the best idea, but showing that you're there to be a partner and to listen and collaborate goes such a long way.
100%.
Also think it's really cool that, you're in this position and you weren't trying to. It goes to show how great you are and how much people are really interested in hearing from you. We all have those friends that post too much on social media and that get made fun of, which isn't nice, but some people post too much and just silly stuff or whatever. So I like that that you got to where you were from people wanting to hear from you and not so much the other way around. So last but not least, we will hear from Maame, and I will just give a quick intro of Maame. Maame De-Heer. So Maame is an adept public health professional with over a decade of academic and professional expertise in healthcare. She serves as a policy analyst with the Government of Canada in the Public Health Agency. Maame engages in diverse leadership and executive roles where she supports and co-leads the Career Progression Task Force for Black Employees Matter, for the Black Employees Matter chapter within the government. She is also an inclusive staffing working group member. Maame's lifelong goal is to impact members of the society through community engagement and service. Over to you, Maame.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Justine. That was an amazing intro. And I just want to give a kudos to all my colleagues who have spoken before me. I would love to share my screen in a few minutes whilst I get this up. And thank you very much as well to the Federal Youth Network for this amazing opportunity to be a guest speaker. Is my screen visible? Okay,
Yes.
awesome. Thank you so much. So, hello, notable federal government leaders and staff, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Maame De-Heer, a policy analyst with the Public Health Agency of Canada. And today I am delighted to be speaking to you on a topic on building a stellar reputation. But the most important thing I want you to remember is, if you take care of your character, your reputation will take care of itself. Once again, if you take care of your character, your reputation will take care of itself. And this quote is from the late American evangelist and publisher, Dwight L. Moody. My presentation objectives would include providing clear tips on how to build a good reputation, identifying the difference between a personal and professional reputation, and also sharing how feedback and constructive criticism could be very important and essential to reputation building. And then lastly, also sharing the linkages between the Beyond 2020 collaboration that was commenced in 2013 here at the Government of Canada. But before I delve into the meat of this presentation, I would love to connect with you. So feel free to connect with me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and any other social media platform. If there's anything that I'm saying today that resonates with you, that touches you some way or somehow, feel free to tweet at me or send me a message, and I'll be more than happy to connect with you from all the list or plethora of information that I've provided here on this screen. I would like to inaugurate the essence of this presentation by first defining what reputation is. A quick Google search will tell you that reputation is defined as the beliefs or opinions that are generally held about someone or something. A secondary definition will divulge that reputation is a widespread belief that someone or something has that someone or something has a particular habit or characteristic. And with the essence or interest of time and for the purpose of my presentation, I will be focusing on the latter definition. That is, reputation being a widespread belief that someone or something has a particular habit or character. I also wanted to note that this presentation will transcend beyond just being a GC worker. The information that will be divulged through my presentation can also be applied to your personal life, to your business, to even being a Government of Canada worker, to mention but a few. Now, we're going to get into the section where I want everyone here to be engaged. We're going to use the chat box to get engaged within the next minute. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up pictures of famous people. And then in the chat box, tell me the first thing that comes to your mind when you see this person. I hope we're clear. So for example, if I put anyone's picture there, just type in the chat box the first word that comes into your mind when you hear of this person's name or see a picture of this individual. So let's begin. Oprah Winfrey. When you hear Oprah, what's the first thing you think of? And I'll look, ooh, the chat is popping. Powerful, strong, influential, powerful, successful, strong, confident, knowledgeable. Okay, guys, relax. I think we're getting so excited about this. Influential, kind, beautiful. Okay, great. I'm loving this. I love the way you guys are getting engaged. Awesome. The next person is, let me get this right, Steve Carrell. When you hear Steve Carrell from The Office, what comes to your mind? Oh man. Funny, hilarious, kind, funny, sexy. Okay, that's another story for another day, but we'll talk about that. Handsome, funny. Someone said, I hate that show. Genuine, hilarious. Okay. So it seems like we're having a different perceptions of who these celebrities are. I'm going to just put up the last two. Are we ready? Queen Bee. When you think of Beyonce, queen, okay. Fierce, influential. Rude, wow. Entertainer, powerful voice, great singer, beautiful presence, boss, high maintenance, superficial. Black girl magic, yes, I'm here for it. Okay, awesome. And the last one, I just want you all to get your fingers ready. The last one. Okay, we're done with Beyonce, guys. The last person is all hail the king, Kanye West. When you hear of Kanye, what comes to your mind? Trouble. Oh man, you guys are not nice. Damn. Rude, denial, troubled, arrogant. Someone said he's a fish. That's another story for another day as well. Awesome. Thank you guys so much for this. This has been amazing. Someone said genius. I agree. Amazing. You know what's interesting about this and why I made everyone do this activity? It shows that when it comes to reputation, everyone has a different perspective of who you are. Some said Beyonce was the queen. Others said she was rude. The way I perceive you or the way your reputation looks to me might be quite different from how it looks to someone. However, overall, there tends to be a higher number of consensus of what people think about someone. So my question to you today is, what do people say about your character? What do people say about you? Because the perception of your habits and your character is your reputation. The perception of Kanye West's habits and his character is what people perceive of him, and that is how his reputation is being portrayed. And I know at this point, a lot of you are asking the question, so how do I build a stellar reputation? How do I build my reputation? How do I even know that I have a good reputation? If someone were to put my picture in another presentation, what would be some of the things that people would say about me? And with the interest of time, I'm going to list 3 key things that you and I say I because I'm in this together with you guys, how you and I can build a stellar reputation. Number 1, developing a good character. As we saw in the definition of what reputation is, encapsulated in reputation is your habits and your character. The way you think, the way you feel, the way you act, the way you behave. What are your temperaments? When your manager asks you to do something, do you immediately get upset, or you step back a bit and just look at things in a different way? These are the things that all amalgamate to form your reputation. In addition to that, I'm not asking you to be perfect, because I myself, I'm not perfect. I'm not asking you to be the Pope. All I'm saying is that in order for us to be the professional and personal people that we need to be in our lives, and in order to achieve that, there has to be an essence of character development that stays with reputation. And I know sometimes we sing this chorus that, you know, I was born this way, that's how I've been since I was young, or the famous one, I don't care of what people think about me. We've heard this a lot of times, where people tend to say, I really don't care what people say. That's their opinion. That's their belief. I am who I am. To an extent, you're right, because sometimes some people can express some opinions about you that are not always true. But what I can share is that if you keep hearing the same thing, the same chorus being sung by everyone that, oh, you seem to be a bit ABCD, I would advise that because that's what your reputation is. You step back a bit, analyze yourself, see how that impacts not only you as a person, but how that impacts your work life. And I strongly believe that this is some of the ways that we can also build our reputation. One other thing that whilst I was planning for this presentation crossed my mind was, have you ever had an instance where you'll be talking to either a friend or a colleague, and then they will pass a very flimsy statement? So for example, someone would say, oh, Mame, every time I'm working with you, you seem to be so sluggish and lazy. I'm just joking. There's a 99%, I can guarantee you, 99% that they actually were not joking. That is your reputation of you all along. But some way, somehow, it slipped up and they had to catch themselves with saying that I'm just joking. So I want you to be very mindful of that as well when you're around colleagues, when you're around family members, because within that, they will say some things about your reputation. And obviously, I'm not asking you to be upset or anything like that when you hear that, but it's a moment that you have to take 2 steps back, reflect on yourself and see how that can drive change and how ideally it can impact your reputation. Moving forward, some of the ways that I developed something called the RAMIC model, so RAMC. Some of the ways that can also help in developing character is reflection. Reflect, and I encourage all of us to do this right after this presentation. Sit back, reflect, think about who you are. Think about what some people have said, or even your manager has said about your work ethic. Think deeply about that, how your family members have pursued you as a person. And then the second step is be aware. Nothing is more daunting than coming to the awareness that, okay, to be honest, I'm a procrastinator. To be honest, I might have some negative vibes around me all the time. To be honest, I'm very cynical. And this is the most important step of you because it's finally coming into reality with who you are. And then thirdly, you are mindful. So being mindful, recognizing that your environment, the things you watch, the things you read, shapes your character. So now moving on, you have to be mindful, whether it's the way you speak, whether it's who you're surrounded yourself with. For me personally, because I'm such a bubbly person, I'm extroverted, I'm not fond of being around people that always want to dump my spirit. So I am very mindful and intentional that anytime I'm talking to someone and they're very cynical, I just them myself, because you are a product of the people that surround you. And then lastly, when you're aware, you reflect, you're aware, you're mindful, then that brings the change. For the interest of time, I'll just run through the remaining things that I have. Asking for feedback and constructive criticism is key. It's very important. This really helps you in developing your reputation, developing who you are. For what I do, let me share a trick with you. Every time I am given a task or responsibility, especially here at GC, after I'm done with that task, I go to my manager and say, what did you think about this? Is there anything that you thought I could improve on? How did you find my presentation? What do you suggest? What that does is you lay yourself as a lamb of sacrifice. So now it's not that during your performance review, your manager is bringing all these things up that you were never aware of. But as time goes on with your work, you've already been getting feedback from your manager, and you're able to use that to improve yourself. And all these amalgamates to develop who you are and your reputation. Thirdly, between the personal and this is the last point on how to develop your reputation. I know many questions have come in terms of how do I distinguish between my personal and professional reputation? And if we were here once I defined what reputation is, it's basically your habits and your character. So ideally, as an individual, you shouldn't have conflicting reputations. You shouldn't be an evil person outside work, but then when you come to work, you're the sweetest person. Or you shouldn't be the sweetest person at work, but then outside work, you're literally the Grinch. You should be able to balance your reputations. And this is very important because even when you go apply for a job, one of the key things they ask you is, who are your references? Give me 3 to 5 references. They don't do that just because, they're just happy to see your resume. They want to hear about your reputation from the people you've worked with. And another thing I also wanted to add to that is maintain a positive character and be mindful of your settings and environment. I believe that this is very important because it will save us in the long run. Sometimes we are in our workspaces and we forget ourselves. I'm sure some of the things you would say to your friends, when you're either just kicking it off, watching Netflix, will not be the same thing you would say in your workspace, but we are not all the same. Sometimes we forget our settings. So we need to be very mindful of that if you do decide to have 2 distinct personalities or reputation, it's important to just be mindful of your settings. We know that the GC came up with the Beyond 2020, which formerly was known as the Blueprint 2020, where we wanted to help with the workers here at GC to create a more innovative and inclusive environment. And the 3 key areas was agile, inclusive, and equipped. And I strongly believe that all these 3 key points amalgamate and help for us to also build our reputation. So I will just entreat you all, if you've not read the Beyond 2020 report, feel free to do so. So as I mentioned, my objectives for this presentation was to touch on developing a good character, both as a worker and both in your personal life, maintaining positive character and being aware of your settings and knowing when to distinguish between your professional and personal reputation. Also identifying that feedback and constructive criticism is expedient for reputation building. And lastly, linking the agile as well as inclusive and equipped focus areas for Beyond 2020 can help us to shape our reputation. Always remember that character influences reputation. If you take care of your character, your reputation will take care of itself. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation. My name is Maame, and I would love to connect with you all. Thank you so much.
Wow, Maame, that was amazing. There's tons of comments in the chat. Everyone's loving your presentation, as are the panelists and myself. So thank you. Gave us so much to work with. I don't even know where to start, but something that really stuck out for me, that resonated with me, is sometimes our reputations are different depending on who we're with. And maybe it's not so much our reputations, but even our personalities change with who we're with, right? If I'm comfortable with my best friend, I'm going to act a little bit different than I am with my manager. So that's something that stuck with me based on what you said, is thinking about how your reputation is to anyone, not changing it depending on who you're with. Also, I like the fact that we should learn from those who we aspire to be like, and hang out with those who we want to be more like, or learn from those who we find inspiring and knowledgeable, and learn from them and try and adapt a little bit. Not to be fake or anything, but to learn what you like in some people and then try and adapt it to yourself. So you gave us so much to work with, and thank you for that. So now's the time where we're going to ask the panelists some pre-planned questions. Although we have a ton coming in the Q&A, we'd still invite you to enter more as things come up. I'm sure you have lots of questions for all the panelists, so please, now's your time to enter your questions into the Q&A, but we will start with some of the pre-planned questions that we have. So Amanda, we'd like to start with you. Pretty simple question, but we'd like you to elaborate a little bit. Are you aware of your reputation? How did you first know of your reputation?
Yeah, great question. It's interesting, and it's funny too, because something that stuck out of Mame's presentation was the same piece of that, like, you can be represented or seen as one person at work and one person, outside of work. Oddly enough, I'm an introvert. Like, I actually prefer, the comforts of my home, but there's this like reputation I have that I'm like very extroverted and very outgoing. And for anyone who's ever done like Nova profiles with your teams, there is this idea that some of your tendencies as a person are adapted at work. So I know I need to be a little bit more extroverted at work, given my position, given my job, given what I do. But naturally, I'm more of a shy, introverted person, like my tea and my book at home. Like that's the perfect weekend. So it's interesting to see that. So I just wanted to touch on that. In terms of my reputation, I would say probably like midway in my career is when I noticed I had a reputation. I would start getting the Twitter comments like, I know you on Twitter. You don't know me. I follow you on Twitter. So it's kind of like the same Sean Boots moment where I was like, okay, like, so you're following me on Twitter. Great. And because of that network I had built on Twitter, specifically focused in the GC, that kind of started translating into my work. So around that time, I was asked to lead the national engagement for the Next Gen HR and Pay initiative, which was, the team replacing Phoenix, or working towards replacing Phoenix. And so it was interesting how that reputation I had built online translated into a job offer to do a specific thing. And that was when I mentioned kind of the stints of high profile, very busy, very subject specific files I started working on. That's when I noticed a bit of that correlation. I would say though, it's funny too, because then sometimes people only see me when I'm like really focused and I'm working, and like I think I'm a really nice, easygoing person. And it was interesting because the reflection piece is really important. And I always ask people like, what were your thoughts of me when you first met me? And a word that I often get was intimidating. Like, you seem to have all your stuff together and you're very go, go, go. And you have your hand in everything. Like, how do you do that? Like, how aren't you burnt out? And it wasn't until I started sharing my mental health story on Twitter that I started kind of getting comments back. And it was like, wow, like, I'm surprised someone like you, like, had these experiences, because my reputation of you is like, you had everything together and you're intimidating and like, you're really going places with your career. And I was like, guys, like, no matter what someone's reputation is as well, like, they kind of experience some of the same things that you're experiencing. Maybe it's not always on public display on Twitter, on social media, and conversations that you're having. So definitely it was twofold. It was when my reputation started translating into job opportunities. Like I said, that kind of trickled. The last 4 years have really just been job opportunity after job opportunity because of specific expertise I had built. But then it's also, recognizing the invitations to speak or to be part of networks or to be part of collaborations. That's really where I started to kind of notice it coming into light. But I think we all kind of, Manny's point was, I think you had flagged something. I'm gonna butcher the wording, but it was something to the effect of like, some people may assume that, what other people think, doesn't matter. And for someone with like high functioning anxiety, I will tell you as a kid, like, oh, it mattered. Like, I was the type of person, like, I scrutinize on the playground. Like, they didn't pass me the ball. Like, oh my God, my life is over. Nobody likes me. Like, you know what I mean? And as I got older, I had to learn to kind of restructure that thinking a bit so that it wasn't impacted. And that's a point I just want to make too. Yes, your reputation is important in your career, but I really hope we're not dwelling on it to a point that it consumes us and that starts to dictate the opportunities we take because we're nervous, or the self-realizations we have about ourselves because of what other people say about us. So that's just a really important piece as we talk about mental health as well. But a little bit of a well-rounded response, but hopefully that gets to it.
That's awesome. Thanks for being so authentic and sharing some of your stories with us. I totally resonate with the anxiety sometimes. They're not so much for me, but I hear about it for others, and I do experience it sometimes. You talk to someone and you say, oh, what did I say? What? And you replay it in your head a few times. We do care, even if we try not to, we do care what people think. So I appreciate that you've raised that and that it's a real thing for a lot of us. So Maame, next question is for you. How did you find out about what others think about you? How did you feel about this at first?
I asked. I think it's a very difficult thing to do, to really ask people what you think about me. I ask. So like I mentioned in my presentation, I'm very direct. I ask my manager. Sometimes I ask my mom. Funny enough, I was going to mention this during the presentation as well, but it escaped me. I tend to actually have people in my life that I know are going to be brutally honest with me and would not lie to me. So for example, right here in this presentation, I tend to invite my closest friends that are actually watching me. And right after the presentation, they will call me and say, you didn't do good. There was something you did that was wrong. You talked too much. You talked too fast. You were running your hands through your hair. You were looking elsewhere. And I get this all. I know some people will say, oh, you're the best presentation person I've ever met. No, right after this, I'm going to get that call and people will share what they thought. But it's all great because it makes you and molds you to become who you are. So I think just to answer the question, how I was able to identify what people thought of me was I asked the right people. Don't just go asking everybody, oh, what are your thoughts about me? Because there's some friends or people that ideally do not like you that you just give them the gun to just shoot you right there. But ask the people that genuinely care about you and you would ideally know. The last thing I'll mention is I am very digital, so I love doing like Google Doodle polls, Google Forms. You can be creative and do something like that and share it with your top 5 friends and family members and create your own questions. What do you think about me? What is something that I do that you feel I should improve on? And I think that really goes a long way. I hope I was able to answer the question.
I love that. Thanks for sharing, Mame. It's true that sometimes we have people that are more adept to telling us the truth and some that we're not so close with that wouldn't tell us the truth. So it's important to have those relationships that you trust each other and you can tell each other. Sometimes even if it's with someone that you really love or someone you're really close to, it's still hard to tell the truth. So it takes a lot of confidence to be able to tell the truth. So you're lucky to have friends like that are genuine with you. Sean, this one's for you. What if we're not on social media? And this is a popular one today, so I'm glad we're touching on it now. What if we're not on social media? How do we influence our reputation or build our brand?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's interesting because for me, I think listening with a lot of folks here on the panel, like being on Twitter and keeping in touch with people there has been a really big part of how I stay in touch with other public service friends. Maybe like half a year before the pandemic, my wife got a job with the Yukon government, and so we moved from Ottawa to Whitehorse. And so Twitter kind of also became the sort of way that I keep in touch with a lot of friends and public service folks that otherwise I would have like gone for coffee at like the Lord Elgin Starbucks or whatever. And then now, of course, with the pandemic, we're all kind of working from home. And so for me, I found it kind of like a really useful way to keep in touch with people that I wouldn't be able to see face to face. But on the other hand, like things like Twitter are like, they're addictive. It's easy to sort of sink a lot of time into them. It's easy to end up like doom scrolling, especially these days where it's like terrible pandemic news, terrible pandemic news, terrible pandemic news. Sort of like that's also not really great for mental health. And so this, I think definitely like a takeaway from today's panel should not be like, oh, you all have to join Twitter or LinkedIn or whatever. Like you should not feel like the pressure to do that. It's like, it's not for everyone. I think the thing that it does, and the thing I guess that's worth sort of thinking about is like Twitter and kind of like the public service kind of, family on Twitter. It's like, that's a really valuable community for me, but like the point is to have a community. It doesn't necessarily have to be like on a social media platform. And so there's like other ways that you can kind of find that similar kind of community. Like one part of it is just sort of like keeping in touch with, friends in the public service that you've worked with, even if you don't work with them anymore, like keeping in touch, setting up like, I don't know, you could have like a Teams channel of people who are interested in a certain topic at work. You could set up like a WhatsApp group chat of like public service friends if you're not on Twitter. That like is a nice way to kind of keep in touch with like where people are like moving to and like cool opportunities that come up. And I think the main thing is just sort of like finding ways to stay connected with people is more the point than just like being like famous on Twitter or anything like that. And so, yeah, finding different strategies for building communities and for staying in touch with people, I think that's the main goal. And for some folks that might be social media, and for other folks it's other ways of keeping in touch. Yeah, it's I think it's definitely worth thinking about like what are the things that work well for you, and how do you make sure that the bad parts of social media don't detract more from your life than like the positive things of like finding friends and community there.
Thanks for sharing. That's really helpful. Makes sense to be, involved. Everyone has to be online now, whether we want to or not, but it makes so much sense to stay part of a community. I love that you said that, part of a community. Doesn't matter if it's through Twitter LinkedIn, whatever, but as long as you're part of a community or staying in touch with your work people, keeping those connections, right? YPN and the Federal Youth Network is a wonderful way to do that. Obviously, we have to give a little promo here. Of course, you're all here because of the YPN and the Federal Youth Network at large. So what a wonderful network to be a part of and to make friends in the government and to collaborate and build connections. So we will do maybe one more question where we have half an hour left. We'd love to get to some of your live questions. So maybe we'll do one more. We'll ask the whole panelist, and then we'll move to the live questions that are still coming in like fire. So the next question for all of you, what if I have no reputation? Is there a danger in that? Amanda, can we start with you?
Sure. I guess I'd ask you a question back, but you don't have to answer. It'll be rhetorical. It was like, what would the danger be? And so I don't think it's a danger per se, like it's not a life or death danger. It's more of a, how will you be able to grow in your career? What tools do you have at your disposal? And your reputation is one of those tools. So if you don't have a reputation, maybe you're missing out on community engagements. Maybe you're missing out on opportunities to collaborate. Maybe you're missing out on events or speaking engagements. Maybe you're missing out on career opportunities. Maybe you're missing out on actings or assignments or experience that will help you grow. So that's how I see your reputation really as something that if you work at it in terms of cultivating it, in terms of building those connections, in terms of sharing your expertise, of connecting with groups, you're fostering your ability to be able to excel a little further in your career. That's not to say that the same two people, one who doesn't have a reputation, one who does have a reputation, can't end up in the same place. 100%, I think you can. I think potentially when you have a stronger reputation, you'll be able to have access to more experiences and people that could potentially support your growth to be able to get there a little bit more quickly. The thing that I see probably the most, just being a hiring manager, is the referrals. So a lot of times departments do have job competitions, but we all know the sad story of how long those take. But at the same time, there are a lot of lateral movements that happen. And if you are competing and you qualified in a pool, there's also the ability to be pulled from said pool. So oftentimes when you have a team who's in need of someone fast, they can't wait 8 months or 9 months, they'll say, do you know anyone with a reputation, with the experience in this space? If you are not known in that space, your name won't pop up. You won't necessarily be brought into the conversation. Whereas, for example, in what I do in change management, or even the sister shop that's under me is like service design, I can say, do you know folks in service design? And like Andy Pittman's name like came up, like as an example, like someone that you see on Twitter actively engaging, sharing, working in this space. Or you talk about change management and the incredible team over at PSPC, their names came up. And their names came up not through social media. That's why I'm throwing that in as an example. Their names came up simply for the reputation of their work that then got shared out. And then people on social media talk about it, even though they're not necessarily all on social media. So the point here is, I don't think there's a danger to not having a reputation. I think when you cultivate that, a good reputation, it can help you excel in your career, but it also can help you build the networks and the communities that will support you to get the development, the learning, the training, the relationships that you need to be able to feel supported throughout your Government of Canada career.
Wow, thanks, Amanda. That was super, super helpful. Maame, can we turn to you next?
I think Amanda said it all. I don't think there's.
Totally fair.
I don't think there's. She said it all. I think in just one sentence, everyone has a reputation. Every single person. I think Amanda did a very perfect job of distinguishing between the strong reputation and the less strong reputation. Even your cat has a reputation for being either catty, sassy. Your dog has a reputation for being, too clingy. So everyone has a reputation. You just have to discover what yours is. So just wanted to share that.
Thank you. Sean, did you have anything to add, or would we like to move on to the next question?
No, I would just plus one everything that Maame and Amanda said, 100%.
Wonderful. All right, so at this time, we're going to move on to the live questions. So if you haven't already, please take a look and give a thumbs up to the ones that you'd like to see answered the most, and we'll run through them that way. So the first one that was the most popular was actually the social media one. So what if social media is not something we all use? What other tools could we use? This is great to know too, especially if we're trying to avoid social media some days. Like Sean mentioned, it's quite overwhelming with the pandemic, or if you're just having a bad mental health day. So it's great to know the other ways being part of a community. So let's move on to the next question. Do you have advice? And insight on how to build a reputation in a virtual environment, especially if no one has joined the Canadian Public Service recently and has limited opportunities to engage with other teams? So I just want to make sure that's clear. I think I maybe messed up the wording a bit. So if someone's new to the public service, how can they build a reputation in a virtual environment? It's harder to get to connect with people. You don't have the water cooler chats or have an opportunity to go for coffee and so on and so forth. So how do we build a reputation virtually? Who wants to jump in first? Shall we go to Maame first this time?
Okay, sounds good. I would say, and pardon me, I know a lot of people would say that they're not really fond of the whole social media aspect, but I would just use my own personal experience because I love to stay indoors. I rarely go out. But what has really helped me, especially during this pandemic, is utilizing my different social media platforms to engage with Government of Canada workers. Interestingly, most of my relationships with GC workers has been outside the GC space. So I actually connected with most of them on LinkedIn. Because sometimes when you're in your department, you get so heads down, focused on tasks, focused on responsibilities, that it's very hard to connect with people that are outside your own circle of colleagues. So I would say for me, what has really helped was just utilizing LinkedIn to connect with people that are in the GC space. So that's the little I'd just like to add to that. And I know Sean and Amanda could touch on that as well.
Over to you, Sean.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think it's definitely been eye-opening, like with friends and colleagues who have joined my team since the start of the pandemic. It's definitely been eye-opening that it's much harder to sort of like get a feel for like the team vibe and like the team culture and like to connect with colleagues when it is, the fully work from home world that we're in now. I think part of it is just sort of, again, like finding opportunities to make like individual connections with people, having like non-super like work task related, just like coffee catch-up calls, or like, if you don't want to spend like yet more hours on a screen, like suggesting to have like a phone call with someone and like go for a walk and just have like a catch-up on stuff outside of work. Like all of that's sort of like the little tiny building blocks of building connections and community and reputation with other public service folks. I think too, this is sort of like advice that I got early on in my public service career too, is that like your kind of immediate team around you makes such a big difference of like what your work looks like what your sort of like work-life balance, like team culture, and sort of like how encouraged you are. And in some cases, like if you're in a team that, you don't feel is like helping you, get connected to the broader public service, or like isn't, giving you a chance to kind of like meet and connect with people, sometimes it's also worth keeping an eye out for other teams and other communities, especially early on when, making sure that you have the time and space to like connect with and like, start exploring like the broader public service is really important. And I think I was really lucky that I was in a team that encouraged that right from the very start. And like to have managers and like, colleagues who are really encouraging about like going out and like learning more about the public service and like finding people from other departments and learning about their work. So yeah, taking the time to do that's really important. And if you have a team that, isn't really open to doing that, like keep an eye out for future teams, because there's always like new opportunities out there for sure.
Apologies for the delay. Amanda, would you like to add to that?
Sure, yeah. So those are all really great points. I'll flag maybe, I'm trying to think in my head how many, I think I have 4. So one, I would say when I started my current job, I started in July 2020. It was right in the middle of a pandemic. And one thing that I brought with me to my team that I was managing is something I've used in other teams I've managed, which was a user profile. And the reason I did this exercise was I asked everyone like who you are, what you do, what's your superpower, what's your interests, what are your hours you like to work, what is your communication style? Because I found that when we did start working in this, virtual model, we were sent home with our tablets. Everyone started clapping, yay, Government of Canada, we did it. And we just kept working. We never really had this discussion of like, I'm at home, you're at home. The only means of connecting now are digital tools. And so we often met for the sake of work-related objectives and deliverables, but we didn't necessarily meet as a team. So creating this user profile was a way to say like, hi, I'm Amanda, this is who I am, this is who you are, this is blah, blah, blah. The whole team kind of like could level set. Then we introduced things like our meeting list mornings and our socials so that people could have dedicated time outside of work meetings to connect as a team, because that team culture is so important. And that's where you start to build those connections and that reputation and that ability to kind of understand who your colleagues are and for them to understand who you are. Breaking this off into like the concept of reputation, I think another important thing that you can do is just being intentional on having coffees with folks. I remember 8 months into my government career, so this was 7.5 years ago, I started at Parks Canada. And I was on a 2-year term, and I just got in for the sake of getting in. So it wasn't the job like my dream job. But I was like, okay, I'm going to get in. I sent an email to every single ADM to say, hi, my name is Amanda, new in your organization. I would love 30 minutes to have a coffee with you. Every single one accepted. And I will tell you right now, 99.9% of leaders will accept. And it doesn't have to be just leaders. I also had coffees with colleagues in different parts of the organization. And then fast forwarding to July, I noticed that need to do that again. So recently I just did that, sent an email to the president of SSC. Hey, I'd love to have a coffee with you, to our VP, to certain ADMs that we work together. We're constantly at these working meetings together, but it's like, here's my deliverable. What do you think? It's never like, hey, I'm Amanda, this is who I am. Like, get to know me as a human being. So that's really important. And the key word there is you really have to be intentional with your time and having those coffee dates and having those opportunities to reach out across your network. And if you don't know who to connect with, maybe ask your manager, have a chat. Hey, I'm really interested in exploring this. Do you know someone that I can connect with? The other piece of that will be Take Me With You. If you don't know about the Take Me With You initiative, ask your manager to go sit at a governance meeting, get visibility, get some airtime. If you're doing a presentation, ask to brief on that presentation. Like I myself as a manager, if I have an employee that worked on something, I'm not going back to credit, why would I present that? Like they just blood, sweat, and tears into that presentation, allow them to present it, or support them if they need that support. That's a great way to create visibility and build a reputation for yourself as well. And the last thing I'll touch on is corporate initiatives. This is just going into ways that you connect outside of social media. I love volunteering. That's just like in my blood. I've always been a volunteer since I was a kid, doing like those chocolate drives, like Girl Guide cookies. But in the same respect, you can volunteer for corporate initiatives. So if you have a mental health group, GCWCC, diversity and inclusion, accessibility, there's tons of different champions within your organization. Find one that interests you and join, because now you're going to surround yourself with like-minded individuals who are outside of your immediate team, who will start to get to know who you are. And then you start once again to build your reputation. And the same is true for cross-functional communities of practice that span across your department. So then you can start building those connections elsewhere. And in the same way that you can do coffee dates in your department, you can do it elsewhere. I took on change management as a new portfolio in October. I've had coffees with people in the Ontario government, the city of Toronto, BC, different federal departments. Like reach out, have the conversation. And if that's something you're not comfortable with, so like I will tell you again, like I've gotten used to it because now it's just like my job. But if you're not comfortable with it, like your manager is there more to like, not just there to give you like taskings and to do your PMA and to do your learning and development plan. Like part of your learning and development plan may go beyond a course. Maybe it's, I'd love to learn how to do a one-on-one coffee. Like, how do I tell someone I'm interested? How do I have those types of conversations? How do I effectively brief? Can you give me some pointers? Going back to Mami's point of building that constructive feedback, and let them help you. And the Take Me With You is a great start if you are more nervous and you don't necessarily want to speak right away. At least you can be visible and have, that observatory experience as well. So lots of great ways to connect outside of social media. There are benefits like we've all said, but there are certainly other ways you can get it done.
You've really given us a lot to work with. You're showing us all up, Amanda, by the amazing tactics that you have. Some of the comments in the chat are, wow, I'm too shy to do that, and this and that, and it seems a little bit overwhelming for some people. So even just take away one thing that Amanda has shared and try and push yourself to do that. We don't have to do it all at once, but these are really wonderful tips. For those of you that are too shy to reach out to senior management for a coffee, you can always take part in speed mentoring initiatives. There's tons that are happening throughout the year, whether it be GCWCC or the ones that we organize as part of Career Boot Camp. So there's going to be some happening in February. So keep an eye out for that. That's a way to integrate yourself without having one-on-one conversations. All right, so where are we? Let's move on to the next question. Sorry, I just gotta scroll to the top. We have so many. So the next question is a good one that should be helpful for a lot of us. How do you balance boundaries of saying no and saying yes and helping others? I have built amazing relationships by helping others. However, I am conflicted with saying no. Any insight to this conflict? Who would like to go first? Sean, are you okay to start?
Yeah, I don't mind. Oh yeah, I don't mind starting, if only to say that I have the same problem and I don't have a great answer. That is a situation I often also find myself in. I was just talking with a colleague yesterday about how for both of us, it's like we're like, you know, being very like externally motivated rather than internally motivated, if that makes sense. So basically, if someone asks me to work on something, I'm like, oh yeah, happy to help, like there for it, awesome. And then all of a sudden I find that I've filled my days with like things to work on that are requests from other people. And it's like, oh yeah, I had this priority that I was supposed to work on, especially for like personal development stuff or whatever, where it's like just for me, I'm just like, oh, I'll push that off till later. I'll push that off till later. So completely agree with the question that it's often really hard to like, I feel like I always prioritize based on like who asked me for help with something the most recently, and not any kind of like actually objective prioritization of what I should actually be working on, which is a long time struggle. Yeah, I think part of it is, you know, being honest with people, which is often like, I often find that it's sort of like this sort of like, you know, triggers or catches where I'm like, oh, you know what, I actually am too busy to take this on right now. I often like that part of my brain doesn't kick in until like much after I've already overwhelmed myself with a lot of other stuff on the go. I'm like, oh, I should have like, you know, cleared some heads down time in my calendar, but did I do that? Nope. Maybe in like 2 weeks. Those are pretty common things to have happen. I think the main thing is like, you know, try to be helpful when you can, but also try to be as upfront with other people about, you know, if you are too busy to take a new thing on. I think people definitely respect when you say no, that you're like, would love to help, but I've got a lot of other commitments. If you know that there's other people that are interested in working on what you've been asked to do, that's also a really nice chance to like, you know, give opportunities to other people, or like I was gonna say like deflect. Feels like you're like trying to just like avoid work, but it's more just like deflecting at a time when you like, you know, that you don't have the time to run with it. Yeah, saying no is really hard. I am not good at it, and I think a lot of the opportunities in my career and life that I've gotten have just been from like defaulting to say like yes to opportunities when they come up. So I think often it is really useful if people are like, oh, do you want to like be part of this like workshop, or do you want to help with this thing? I'm just like, great, yeah, let's do it. That's often really useful, but the downside is it's challenging to know when you really do have to say no and you don't have a lot of practice in how to communicate that. That can often be really challenging. So yeah, I would just say that it's a thing I'm working on, and I wish I had more useful tips because I empathize.
Maame, can we turn to you to add to that? Thanks for sharing, Sean. It was an authentic answer, and I think we all suffer to some degree.
I'll pass this one to Amanda. I feel like she's the perfect person to answer it, if that's okay. So Amanda, I'll pass it over to you.
No pressure, Maame. What can I add to this that Sean didn't say? I am one of those people that say yes quite a bit. And I will personally tell you in my own life where I find myself right now, I've had to reprioritize my life. I've been like this driven, just say yes to everything because that will, you know, help me grow, and just so focused on supporting and developing, et cetera, et cetera. And then as your life changes, and, you know, everyone's life has ebbs and flows, you'll have different priorities. And I think it's really important to kind of measure out your cup of water, right? Like if your cup barely has any water in it and you're thirsty, like you can't share it with someone. Otherwise you're gonna like, it's that oxygen mask, you know, put your oxygen mask first kind of idea. I will say I really like what Sean said in terms of honesty, because one thing that I don't appreciate is if I do ask someone for help and they say yes, and now I'm guaranteeing that like that portion is gonna, or whatever I need you for, you're doing it. And then like at the last minute, you don't. And then now additional impact is added to my life and stress. And it's like, that's a clear indication of like negative, like 10 points for Gryffindor on the reputation. You know what I mean? So honesty is really key, but also weigh out like what maybe it's not good for you right now. So I'll give you an example. I got asked to speak for something in a couple of weeks, and between now and April, I'm acting in my role. I'm taking 7 courses. I have my other life things that I'm doing. I have no life right now. So I really had to say, sorry, like if you do want me to help, I would love to help you, but I can't until April. So at least you're giving them an ultimatum, like, hey, I would love to be involved. My conditions to be able to support you are post-April, or whatever your conditions are. If that works for you, I would love to support you. If not, I know someone else who would be great, and maybe I can refer you to them, and passing on that opportunity, I think is fine. And passing on the opportunity is another great way, because then people will remember like, hey, they passed an opportunity to me. If I feel overwhelmed, maybe I can pass it on to them. And then you can lean on your network that we've been, emphasizing, this community, to be able to support you. But definitely weigh out, giving and taking. It's that whole dynamic. If I do give part of myself, like to be able to help this, like, am I sacrificing other parts of my life? Like, is that worth it? Measure that out. But it is, someone wrote in the comments, I'm trying to follow along a little bit. Someone wrote like, at the beginning of your career, it may be harder to say no versus being a few years in. And I can completely agree. I remember being like the youngest in some of my teams, and like, I didn't have kids, and like, okay, I'll stay late till 9 o'clock or 9:30 or whatever. I'll take that on, or I'll do it because other people. Now I'm a little bit more assertive. No, I don't have time. And like, no, I can't do that. But you learn that in yourself. And I think that's something you can't teach. It's like, you kind of have to learn how to use your voice and empower it, and and go from there. But really great question. And if it's something you're struggling with, again, like talk to your community, lean on your community. I think they can certainly help ease some of that stress off your shoulders if you can.
Thanks so much, Sean and Amanda, for sharing. Really, really helpful. Let's move to the next question. We only have time for a couple more, so apologies. We have so many great questions, but we could talk all day, so we'll have to cut it off in maybe 2 more questions. The next one with the most likes is, I am frequently surprised at how many presenters at this boot camp mentioned being so active on Twitter and social media. I was told when hired, and have been reminded since, that it's not great practice to identify as a Government of Canada employee online. I realize this is a comment, but would like to elaborate a little bit here. So can you tell us how to remain, nonpartisan? How do we build our reputation but not represent our department, making sure that, the views are our own? Anyways, I'll leave it to the panelists to elaborate further. Who would like to start? Please just jump in.
I'll take this one. Oh, Maame, you want to go?
Oh, go. I'm gonna go.
No, you go. Go.
You're sure? Okay, no problem. Thank you. I would say I had the same, when I started as a GC worker, I had the same issue where I was mostly told that it's not, you should be careful when you are on social media, especially as a Government of Canada worker. So what I did initially was that I had a conversation with my manager and asked her, what are the do's and don'ts as a GC worker? What are some of the things that I'm allowed to share on social media, and what are some of the things that I'm not allowed to? And one thing she said to me that stood out to me, and I've had it at the back of my mind all the time, even when I'm making posts on social media, is she said, ensure that anytime you're going to post something on social media that is work related, ask yourself this question: is it public knowledge? Is it something that I could easily go on Google and find out? If it is, you can post, and this is work related. If it is, then sure. But if it's something that is not open to the public and public knowledge, and it's something that has to do with your work, she as a manager does not advise that I do so. So it's something that every time, if I'm going to post anything, GC related on social media, I have it at the back of my mind. I also just wanted to share that under the Canada Public School of Public Service, there is a course called Navigating Social Media as a Public Servant. I believe that would really help to answer your question as well, and especially for all GC workers who are quite confused as to how to navigate between being on social media as well as being a worker with the government of Canada. So I just wanted to share that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Maame. Amanda, would you like to add to that, or would you prefer we move on to the next question?
Sure, I'll be really quick because I know that I can talk. I'll throw in the comments. I created a graphic a long time ago on helping people navigate Twitter, especially. I will say one thing. I remember when I first created this graphic, I created it because we were doing the national engagement for Next Gen. And it was like trying to get my team on board so that we would all be tweeting and collaborating and working in the open about our file. There is a rule of thumb that I always learned since I was, started in the government. It was like, if it puts you in jail, in court, or on the front page of the newspaper, maybe you should have put it on Twitter. So that's a really simple guide to go by. The other thing I will say is that common sense is like, remember, if it, like Mame's point, if it's not shared publicly, you probably shouldn't share it. If it's secret, consider your clearance, things like that. But talking about how you work is always a good go-to as opposed to what you're working on. And Sean is a really great example, and his blog is a really great example of that too. But I will say I take one pet peeve with my own previous advice, which is the views are my own. Of course they're your own, it's your handle, it's your profile. So I removed that because I've had other more important things to put in my bio than views are my own. And I know a lot of people using Twitter feel that. But at the end of the day, I think where some of the political stuff is where you want to be able to show that you're being nonpartisan. So if you have it in for something that the government's doing and you go on this rampage on Twitter, and then the next election, that government sector wins, can you be nonpartisan? Because that's kind of reflected online. I mean, it doesn't mean you can't communicate how you feel. So it's how it's the nuance of how you communicate certain things that is really being looked at. But at the end of the day, how you work is definitely my go-to in terms of leveraging social media.
Thank you so much for sharing those tips.
Yeah, I would just +1 everything that Maame and Amanda said, and it's interesting because I think a lot of it also kind of depends on the context of the work that you're doing or the field that you're in. If you're working in national security stuff, totally legit, that you're not here I am tweeting about my work at CSE or something, don't do that obviously. But for me, working kind of the digital government or public sector modernization kind of field, working in the open is becoming more and more of sort of a cultural part of that whole field of work. And one of the things I've really appreciated is being able to learn from people in other countries that are working in the open and blogging and tweeting about their work, sharing software code on GitHub, all sorts of stuff like that. My team and I have been able to really take things like that and run with them. And so part of it is sort of trying to reciprocate that back out to other people working in the same field or to the rest of the world. And over the last year and a bit since I've been blogging, one of the things that I tried to do early on was sort of just try to figure out for myself, kind of Amanda and Maame were both saying, what are the sort of principles that I am trying to draw within those lines as I'm either tweeting or writing stuff that's public. And yeah, it's be really nonpartisan, don't scoop official announcements, don't accidentally become a spokesperson when you're not authorized spokesperson for new programs that haven't been announced yet. And the other part that's often really tricky to figure out is sort of in a team like mine that's trying to change how the government does IT stuff, how do you be critical about things that are broken without just being a cranky public servant who's everything is the worst. And it's often hard to find that line because again, there's parts of the public service ethics code that are a duty of loyalty, and it's how much criticism is constructive and helpful, and how much criticism is not loyal anymore. Those are really blurry, really complicated lines. And one thing that I found really helpful is just having friends and colleagues who I trust a lot, that I can be hey, Lucas, a good friend and colleague of mine. It's here's my draft blog post. Did I go too far? Did I not go far enough? Does this hit the line? And having this sort of the phone a friend strategy is really helpful for this, whether it's things that you're thinking about posting on Twitter to spark conversations or blog posts or anything like that. It's really nice to be able to get a gut check from someone else and not just be here goes nothing. Like, that's not a great strategy.
Love it. Thanks, Sean. At the end of the day, worst comes to worst, we can always delete our posts. So if you get a negative reaction, delete it as fast as you can. But no, jokes aside, just I think the bottom line is not being offensive, trying to share your views, but make sure you consider all different perspectives and not being offensive or disrespectful. Okay, let's move on to the next question. We're running out of time, so let's do this really quickly. Maybe if you could each say 2 quick tips. So I'll turn to both of you and you'll say 2 quick tips or suggestions. What are some tips you could give to make connections or build relationships online during the COVID pandemic? Amanda, you first.
Okay, I feel like we've covered a lot of this, but maybe what I'll say is I saw someone say when I was talking about my coffee is that like they're shy and like, you know, how do you do that? I'm not comfortable. And the idea is like, a lot of times people think you have to have a coffee with like a president or an ADM or a VP to gain value. And the truth is your peers actually probably have 10 times more value to offer because they're closer to you in work experience in life and potentially your next step in your career. So my advice would be like, if that is daunting to you, start with just colleagues, start with having just like an informal coffee with a colleague and then working up your confidence to be able to have one with, you know, potentially someone more senior and preparing for that conversation. I'm really bad at preparing sometimes, like, because then I get in all my head about like the notes I wrote. So like, I personally just like to wing things. But if you need to like have a few questions, like jot them down ahead of time so that like, if there is a lull, you can say, oh, by the way, and so like, what was like the most challenging thing you experienced in your career? Like you can have some back pocket questions similar to how like panels like this one have back pocket questions in case there is lack of engagement. You know what I mean? Like you always prepare just in case. So that would be my tip is prepare, have those coffee dates and prepare for them. And then the other thing I would say is that if social media is starting to feel like a task, then just stop. Like, because that's when you'll start to see some of like that lack of authenticity. Like if you're just going and you're retweeting random things and like you're not even being part of the conversation yourself, like it's okay to take a step back and like only go there when you have something to say and like worth sharing or worth collaborating on. Like there are days that I sometimes don't go on my Twitter. I'm just like that lurker that likes things in the background, and that's okay. Like I'd rather do that. And there was a whole career, like when I worked at Treasury Board, like part of my career I didn't speak of because everything was secret. So I couldn't talk about anything. So it was like really my food that people were seeing during that year. But you just adapt. So hopefully, you know, adapt, prepare, try to get out of your comfort zone, be present when you need to be present. And I'll leave it like that at that. But there's a lot of things that you can learn online from your colleagues, whether it be online in person through or virtual person through video conferencing or through social media. Just figure out what works best for you and try it, test it out.
Love that. Thank you for sharing all that, Amanda. We will hold off on asking the others because we're getting to the end of the time. But something that I'd like to emphasize is that there's a networking session today at 4:30. That's Eastern time. So it's with all the GC movers and shakers. So very influential people across government, across Canada that we've invited to attend. So we'd love to see all of you there. Again, 4:30 for about an hour. And you can find the link in the chat. Marcella will be posting it. She just posted it right there. So it's on the WonderMe platform. Thank you everyone so much for joining us today. As you've seen, Marcella is sharing all the links for the resources, which can be found on the CBC Wiki page. So please feel free to check that out and you can always refer to it later. All of the events will be recorded and shared at a later date. Some of the previous ones from last week are already being shared. So check those out if you haven't seen them. We've heard great comments about the sessions that happened last week. So be sure to check those out. The next session today is at 3 p.m. Happening with wonderful panelists. Be sure to check it out. It's called Weighing Variables of Different Positions. So we've touched on some of that here today, but I'm sure we're all eager to learn more about what the best place is for us in the government. So thank you again. Thank you, Maame, Sean, and Amanda. You've given us a lot to work with here. And I'm sure you would all agree in saying, let's keep the conversation going. They've all agreed to have you reach out to them. So make sure to connect with them on Twitter, LinkedIn, or just send them an email. Thanks everyone so much.